Well, thank you very much for allowing us to be here today, especially on the Legion's birthday. So congratulations and happy birthday to all of you, because I know you have a place in that for sure. So I'm Wendy Laxo. As Andy said, yeah, I'm a military, now veteran spouse. My husband was 30 years Army. Oh, come on, there's more Army than two. There you go. Okay, good. My dad was Navy, so that's good too. And both of our sons were Army. You know, you breed your own, right? That's kind of what they say, and it is absolutely true, as well as in the Legion. I mean, I see it's such a family, and not just a family amongst yourselves, but truly, your families are fully involved. So I love that as well. But again, Wendy Laxa, just a little bit about my background. So I was the chief of the Army Suicide Prevention Program. Went up to DOD with the Department of Defense, worked with Adam there and met him there. I was in charge of partnerships, communication, and training at that point, and then went to the Department of Veterans Affairs, led that portfolio again, partnerships, and then also acted as the deputy director there. And then I did some stuff at the White House, or with the White House, I should say, to put together a plan to decrease veteran suicide across the nation writ large. So here I am today working with the Columbia Lighthouse Project with a very close and past colleague, which is great, current colleague too. I, part of Columbia University. I will say we don't live in New York though. I'm actually in Tennessee, and Adam is in DC. But we do get up here as much as we can because I am from the Northeast, if you hear a little bit of my accent. But anyway, again, thank you all very much, and I'll turn it over to Adam to start.
Hey, good afternoon. Great to see everyone. I'm Adam Walsh. I work at Columbia University with Wendy. Grew up in Nebraska, and a long line of farmers, and my grandfather served in the Army. My uncle was, two uncles. One uncle served in the Army, and the other one served in the Air Force. So very, very proud of them. I'm the former director of suicide prevention for the Marine Corps. Any Marines out there? No? You got one? Okay, all right. Got very close to the Marines. I also a little clinical provider, so got to do a lot of counseling with Marines. I think they kind of adopted me as one of their own. It was wonderful to be with them and help them. Learned a lot from them. Also worked at the Pentagon in charge of suicide prevention research and program evaluation. So very happy to be here. Hopefully we can teach you some things you haven't learned about suicide, some different perspectives, some different data. I've also had the fortune of working around the world to prevent suicide, especially among children in developing countries. So hopefully we have lessons learned and different stories we can tell you to help prevent suicide. So we're going to go ahead and, you get a click? All right. All right, so just start off with some data on suicides. In 2022, we had close to 50,000 suicides in the United States. And we actually have some more recent data. In 2023, we know that the suicide rate in the United States had reached an all-time high, a historic high in the United States. So what that tells us is that we need to do some different things. We're trying to change our approach. Traditionally, we were, in the United States, we kind of saw suicide as a medical problem or a disease. And we're changing our approach and making it more of a community public health approach. That's why we're here to help with you. And hopefully teach you some skills to help prevent suicide. All right, I like this one better. Help prevent suicide in the community. Because what we're learning, especially with service members, when I work closely with the Marines, there's a lot of stigma about asking for help and talking about problems. And in the veteran population, there's also a lot of stigma. So what we need to do is we need to get out into the community. And when veterans and service members talk to me, they say, "Hey, Doc, you're a nice guy, but I'd rather talk to one of my brothers, one of my sisters, somebody who's really gone through what I've gone through. So I'd really like to talk to a peer." And that's what we're really finding is very helpful. So we need to teach you all, because you're in the American Legion, you're out of post, you may have a veteran come in the door, and they might be suffering in silence, and you'll be able to engage with them in a conversation about how they're doing. And that means a lot. Like what Chuck was saying earlier, is that, you know, part of the mission is to reach out to people and make sure that they know that they're not alone. So we're here to make sure that you all know how to help another veteran. Okay, so in the United States, in the veteran population, about 6,407 veterans died in 2022. That was an increase of 15 from 2021, and an increase of 129 from 2020. It's the second leading cause of death for veterans under age 45, and the rate for veterans ages 55 to 74 also increased by about a little over 4%, and then the rate of veteran suicide over 74 years old increased about by 5%. So we're also understanding that we really need to reach out to older veterans as well. Sometimes older veterans are more isolated or maybe by themselves, so we really need to reach out to our older veterans as well. And we also know caregivers are affected by suicide thoughts and behaviors. 31% of caregivers of veterans had considered suicide in the past 30 days. And a little good news at the end here is in 2022, there were 271 suicide among female veterans, but we've seen a drop. So that was a decrease by 80 female veteran suicides compared to 2021. And then when you look at New Jersey compared to other states in the country, it has a significantly lower rate of suicide in New Jersey. So you all must be doing lots of good things here compared to some other states. All right, slide. Okay, so people want to know who's at risk. What are the risk factors? How do I know if someone's going to die by suicide? What we always like to say is it's really hard, almost impossible to predict suicide. With all the fancy machine learning, artificial intelligence, all of this wonderful technology, did you know that they're about 1% effective in predicting who will die by suicide, who and when? So all of our wonderful technology can't predict suicide, but we believe we can prevent suicide, and that's what's really important. And understanding the risk factors can help you give you some understanding of what people may go through be at an elevated risk for suicide. So we have some factors that some service members may bring in to the service before they enlist. Those are things like a history of abuse. You know, being abused as a child can certainly affect someone for their entire life. And then there's this disruption in the social network. If you think about when you served in the military and then when you transitioned out, your life changes significantly. Your friends are different. Maybe your finances are different. Your job is different. And what we also know is if service members are discharged other than honorable, we know that increases risk for suicide quite a bit. That's a factor by itself that really increases suicide. We don't know exactly why. There's a lot of things that are kind of packed in there about that, but it's an important question to ask when you have conversations with people. You know, tell me kind of your experience separating from the military. Then we also have judgment factors. We all know about sleep. Sometimes I know it's hard. We know that veterans have more difficulty with sleep than the general population. It's important that you sleep so that you can take care of yourself, make good decisions. It's hard to deal with, it's hard to be patient. It's hard to make good, sound decisions if you're really, really sleep deprived. And then we also have stressors. These are kind of situational stressors with you experienced a loss of someone close to you, maybe a brother or a family member or a fellow service member. Work problems, disciplinary or legal issues, financial issues, all of those things can add a lot of stress to someone's life. And then health issues. We're learning more and more that veterans, right before they die by suicide, they may be experiencing a lot of physical pain or chronic physical illness. Sometimes is not well treated. And so it's really important for veterans to make sure that they're getting into good health care. Also, other risk factors that we know, impulsivity. We know that suicide, we'll talk more about this, can happen very quickly from thinking about suicide and attempting. And then shame, feeling shameful, or we also talk about moral injury. I don't know if that's a term you all have heard of, but this idea that you maybe did something wrong and you feel bad about it and you hold that guilt inside. And then also hopelessness and helplessness, and also alcohol, increased alcohol, drug use. Using, obviously, alcohol and drug can impair your decisions and get in the way of making those good, sound decisions. Okay, so next slide. All right, but on the other side of this, other side of the coin, are protective factors. So things that can steal us or protect us against suicide. Right at the top is feeling like you belong. So belonging to the American Legion, belonging to your community, that's really, really important. That can protect people against suicide. And then good help seeking. So when you are going through a tough time, asking for help, that's very important, can protect against suicide. Having gainful employment, having family and peer support, access to health, good health care, mental health care. So I've been doing a lot of research last 25 years on suicide. What keeps coming up is social connectedness, feeling like at least one person really has your back, has your six, really cares about you. Knowing that is the strongest protective factor against suicide. So think about people in your life. I remember working with, it was a master gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps. And when he would go around to his Marines, he would say, I always want to look at who's on the fringes, and I want to bring them in. So I'm always looking on the fringes and wanting to bring those Marines that are out on the fringe, because they got to be in the unit. Because then I can make them feel like they belong, they're part of the mission, they're part of our unit. That's really important. So I encourage you to do that when you're, at your post, when you're in the community and you notice somebody's kind of out by themselves or on the fringe or kind of out by their own. We all have different personalities, but if you notice that somebody's just kind of out there on their own, try to bring them in, make them feel a part of, I see first responders, part of the department, part of the post. That's really important. Okay, so my first trivia question, and some of you already know this, that was in the previous training, but can anybody tell me the single day in history in the United States where we had by far the lowest rate of suicide ever recorded? Yeah. Yes, 9/11 and then the day after. Absolutely. Great answer. Yes. And can you tell me why?
Because we were attacked externally, and I think, as a guess, we were attacked externally, and as a result of that, I don't want to go into this, but people around me might agree with me.
Yes.
I think the opposite is going wonderful. Maybe go on to fine with alcohol, I won't do this, and I won't care. It's the opposite. I think people are under attack.
Yeah, absolutely. People, for a day or two, people forgot about maybe their own issues, and they thought about something bigger than yourself and banding together as a nation. And it's amazing how low that suicide rate was. So remember that. Banding together, having that common mission is really important for us in terms of our mental health. Okay, so people ask, how do people get down the road to thinking about suicide and attempting? Why does that happen for some people and not for others? And so people usually want, one single answer or some, like a simplistic response. And you're not going to get that from us, but you will. We did try to condense it down so that we can best explain it, because it's, it can be different for different people, why they are in a situation when they're thinking about ending their life. But we have tried to condense it down to two major reasons, and this is a gathering, kind of a culmination of 20, 30 years of research and the best data around suicide. So two paths of suicide. The first one is stopping people's pain. When we interview people who have attempted suicide, I did a study with the Marines, and Marines who survived a suicide attempt where I could talk to them and their family members, they would say, you know what? It's because I wanted to stop the pain. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I wanted to stop the pain of feeling alone. I wanted to stop the pain of feeling loss of a fellow Marine that we were in combat and he lost his life. Also pain of losing a relationship, a significant other, a girlfriend or a wife that they thought they would be with for the rest of their life and they lost that person. So relationship pain, they wanted to stop that, and physical pain. So that's what you hear from people who survive a suicide attempt is, I want to stop that pain. And there's things that we can do to stop pain in people's lives. We were at the homeless, the housing for homeless yesterday, and one of the things that you can do is you can stop pain among homeless veterans by providing housing for them, providing a chance for them to have a life, to have food to eat. That really helps people with suicide, is to make sure that they have what they need. Then access to good, again, physical and mental health care. And then having good coping and problem solving skills, making good decisions, finding good ways to deal with stress in your life, that can help stop the pain. And then the Columbia scale, which we'll teach today, is a really good way to help stop some of that pain, which is reaching out to people and letting them know that they're not all alone, that you're there to help them. And the other second road here, or the pathway to suicide, is in some ways fairly kind of simple, and this is the idea of just making it harder. So you're going to find out later that suicide thoughts and wanting to die come and go very quickly. And so if you can stop in the moment that person from reaching a method of suicide or being able to access something to die by suicide, you can many times save their life and save their life forever. And so we talk about mean safety, which is making sure that medications, firearms, we talk about firearms here with veterans because 73% of veterans who died by suicide use a personally owned firearm. So that's why we talk about it. If we were in a different country, we'd be talking about other means. In the 1950s, in the United Kingdom, people were dying by coal gas. People were putting their heads in coal gas ovens and dying by suicide. Well, guess what they did in the United Kingdom? They outlawed coal gas, and can you guess what happened to their suicide rate? It went way down. Yeah. And so that's one really good example. And then there's other examples of putting nets under bridges, also putting barriers on train tracks. Those save a lot of lives. So that's the other pathway, is when a person is in crisis, making it more difficult for that person to access a lethal means of suicide. Oh, yeah, okay. All right, thank you. So as I said at the beginning, we're trying to shift away from this idea that the only way we can help people is to get them to a hospital or a clinic or to an emergency room. The best way that we've learned to prevent suicide is that if we can, there's certainly some circumstances when we absolutely have to get somebody to a hospital. It's an emergency, but many times we can maintain that person in the community and get them help in the community, either through outpatient counseling or whatever it might be. And so we're trying to move away from this idea that the only way to treat suicide is in a hospital or with a psychiatrist. We know that we need to reach out beyond that and get into the community. And like we're here to prevent suicide. We need everybody to help prevent suicide in the community.
I never know when he's going to turn it over to me. I'm just always there in the waiting. So we know that there's still a stigma around veterans seeking care, right, or seeking help. And someone had mentioned to us, and I know I'm going to get this wrong, but at the last training they said one of the reasons, someone came up to us afterwards, and I thought it was just, I never heard this before, but one of the reasons that veterans don't like to seek help is because they ask for help once, but they're not going to ask for help again. They're not going to ask for help a second time, right? I had never heard that before, so I thought I wanted to bring that up here because it's true, right? A lot of us are like that. But a lot of us too, I know veterans want to take care of it themselves, right? But the good thing is that they will talk with a peer, their buddy. I love that you guys are doing buddy checks. They'll talk with their spouse, their close friend, a family member, a loved one, basically, right? That's why peer support is so very important, and we'll talk about that again. But there is a perception out there that veterans are broken. And I think we're getting better around that. Do you feel like you're hearing and you're not hearing that as much? I feel like I'm not hearing that as much, and I'm in that civilian world, right? I'm not a veteran. So I feel like I'm not hearing that as much, which is really, really good. But these are all reasons. Veterans, basically, you want to take care of yourself and you want to take care of your own, and that's why I love this peer support, what we'll talk about as well as the first responder community. Peer support is extremely important. I mean, and this is why we love to do this training, which really geared specifically for veterans, but also our first responder community. One, because you're very closely connected, right? You see things or have seen things that others have not, and you have together, and you've experienced those experiences a lot of times together, or similar experiences. And same thing, peer support. I mean, with our first responders, a lot of our veterans are first responders. So how many firefighters and how many first responders do we have in the room as well? Okay, see, so they're not all standing there in the back corner right there. They are scattered throughout in the members. Okay, wonderful. Great. So this kind of goes into our peer support. It increases hope. And this is why I know when we were talking about the protective factors and the risk factors, really the bottom line is hope. If you can keep hope alive within yourself or your friend or your family or whatever it is, then you know what? You really are protected more against dying by suicide or at risk of suicide. It improves your quality of life. Just having somebody there with you, right? When you're lonely, that's a terrible feeling. But when you know that you have somebody that you can rely on or a close friend, it increases your quality of life. It decreases all sorts of things, and I'm not going to read the slide, but it also helps you connect with resources. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later today too, is that if you're not aware of your resources as a peer or a buddy, right? When you do buddy checks, it's important to know the resources that are in your area. So if you're not aware of them, get to know them, because you may be using those resources sometime to help somebody else. So here we go. We had talked a little bit about this, right? Why does it resonate so much with law enforcement and our first responder community? Because you do share those like situations, and you've been exposed to those traumatic events together a lot of times, or even similar events. But I wanted to talk about something that we found yesterday, actually, when we were trying to do some research in New Jersey to make it a little more relevant. Cop to Cop is the confidential 24/7 program, 24-hour program that they have here for police. Are all of you familiar with that, or those that are in the police department familiar with that program? No? Oh, we need to get more information out. So we were going to ask you how it's working. But if you're not, supposedly that is still ongoing and alive and well here in New Jersey. So I think it's wonderful that they have a peer line, literally, where you can call and get support. And there's a lot of different veteran organizations and VSOs that do that as well. So we have Vets for Warriors that you can call, and they connect you with a peer. Even a spouse can call them if you're feeling some sort of stress or issues. So facts about suicide. So I'm going to talk about some misconceptions, and I'm going to talk about some facts. And I do this for two different reasons. One, because there's a lot of information out there that's inaccurate. A lot of information from the past that we've actually become more aware of, right? So they have now been misconceptions. The other reason is it's a barrier for us to help others. So not only a barrier for some people to get care, but also it's a barrier for us to reach out to others. And I'll kind of explain when I get to some of those that are a barrier for us. So most people who think about suicide die by suicide. like Adam said, you're not suicidal all the time, right? So when you think about our emotions, who's happy every single second of the day? Right? No, no one, right? I wish I was. I think I'm a pretty happy person. I wish I was. But just like suicide, our emotions ebb and flow, right? If somebody is suicidal 1 minute, they may not be suicidal the next. So like I said, just like our emotions, thoughts of suicide ebb and flow, right? So it's about 1% of individuals that actually go on to take their life. Adam, jump in whenever you want to. Only clinicians can or should work in suicide prevention. Who believes this? Oh, I'm so glad I don't see any. Seriously, sometimes I see hands on this. I am not a clinician. And I like when Adam and I get up here and train because I'm not a clinician. He is. So if you have any clinical thoughts afterwards, go to him because I will just direct you to him anyway. But yeah, and I've been working in suicide prevention for a long time, even as the chief leading programs, leading the Army suicide prevention program, and I'm not a clinician. So I think that's wonderful because, again, it takes us out of that medical model, right, that we have to use the clinic, the medical side of it, to treat or help somebody that may be suicidal. Treating, yes, they do. You should go to a clinician, but not helping. And that's why this public health model or community model is so important. Because everybody can do it, even me. Okay. Owning a firearm is not associated with suicide risk. Definitely a myth, and we talk about that here in the United States specifically. You heard Adam mention bridges. So I was just over to Scotland last year, and I was talking to them about bridges, and using the Columbia tool, of course, but talking with them about bridges because in Scotland, that's the most prevalent means of suicide, of dying by suicide, is bridges. I know Adam was telling me today that Japan has put some nets around their metro, their train system, and they, that was their most prevalent means. Somebody would jump in front of a train. And now they can't, and their suicides are decreasing. So we talk about firearms here in the United States because firearms are the most prevalent means of dying by suicide in the U.S. It has nothing to do with Second Amendment rights. We have firearms in our home. I love to shoot, I say, and we like to go to the range. But we talk about it carefully because sometimes we do get pushback sometimes. So we want to make sure that we at least let you know that it is not about Second Amendment. It's taking away firearms at all. It really is about safety. You want to do a couple of these?
Sure.
Okay. See, I like to catch him off guard too.
Thanks. All right, so when I was working with the Marines and then also at the Pentagon, I would have flag officers, commanders say, Doc, it doesn't matter if we talk about secure storage, we talk about using lock boxes, we talk about separating ammunition from a firearm. That sounds really good because we know suicide's impulsive. We want to protect our families, our kids. We know there's some accidental deaths that happen also, so it's a good idea for secure storage of firearms. However, does it really matter? Because I know that if somebody's suicidal, they're always suicidal. It doesn't matter what you do. If you take away a firearm, then they'll go jump off a bridge. If you put a net under a bridge, then they'll go and take some poison or some pills. Absolutely wrong. What we found with really, really good research is if you can make it more difficult to access one method of suicide, that person is 93 to 94% likely to go on and never attempt suicide again in their life. Very important, so that we need to be aware of what people are going through and making their environment safe. There's kind of a funny story. We were doing training in South Carolina, in kind of a rural part of South Carolina, and there was an American Legion member from the South Carolina American Legion, and he said, Doc, I really like that slide because I was in a huge fight with my wife, and we were outside, lived on a farm, and he said, my wife said, you know what, Joe, I'm sick of your crap. You know, you're just a pain in my rear, and I'm done. I want to get divorced, and I'm just done with you. You just caused so much problems in my life, and I can't count on you, so I'm going to leave you. And so Joe got really upset, and he ran down to his barn, and he opened the barn doors, and he had a Glock that he had down there. It's loaded, unlocked, and he went ahead and grabbed it. And he was about ready to put it to his head, and he had a pet goat. And this goat jumped up and grabbed his hat off his head while he was getting ready to take his firearm to his head. The goat grabbed the hat, and all of a sudden Joe said, what the hell am I doing? Why am I doing this? Why am I going to end my life? I know I can keep going. I don't, you know, if my wife wants to leave me, okay, but I still have life to live. So that moment where that goat grabbed his hat was enough to interrupt those thoughts. And this, now, 10 years later, he's doing well. So again, can be very kind of in the moment. So I always like that story. Okay, so suicide is not impulsive. Actually, we know that lots of different studies studying people who survived suicide attempts that many times thinking about suicide and acting on suicide can be under 10 minutes or under 5 minutes, even under 1 minute. And this can be a large proportion. Close to 50% of suicides can happen that quickly. So we know it's important to constantly stay in contact with people, ask how they're doing, and pay attention to what's going on in their life. Did something significant or kind of catastrophic happen to them? Did they lose a job? Did they lose a relationship that was very important to them? It's really important to pay attention to your buddies. Okay, so I always think, you know, I always look to Winnie and say, can we take this slide out of here? Because we don't need to talk about this, do we? But every time I go out and do training, some people still think that you're going to give somebody the idea. And when we worked at the Pentagon, we had commanders that said, you know what would fix suicide is get rid of suicide prevention, because we're giving people the idea that suicide is something that we should be talking about. So if you didn't talk about suicide, then it would go away. I can't tell you how false that is. We know, in fact, it's absolutely the reverse. If you ask somebody about what they're going through, if they have thoughts about suicide, they all say, thank you. Thank you for asking me. And they feel relieved that somebody cares about them. So that's absolutely false. So it definitely won't give somebody the idea. We actually need to talk about it more. We need to talk about it effectively. We need to help that person.
This is the one that I said was a barrier to us helping others. So put that into perspective. You're not going to, if you talk to somebody about suicide, like you said, you're not going to have somebody go for that.
Okay, this was a really important change in the way we think about suicide now. When I was trained, I guess I've been over 20 years now as a therapist, mental health therapist, I was taught that most people that die by suicide or think about suicide are mentally ill. People have schizophrenia, bipolar, chronic major depression. And what we've learned, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, is that if you actually look at the data and really good methods of understanding who dies by suicide, we had it wrong. Less than half of people who die by suicide have any sort of mental illness, and sometimes the mental health issue that they have is an adjustment disorder, which is a situational problem, like financial problems, legal problems, or relationship problems. And why is that so important? It's so important because of who we're looking for. I was always trained to look for that person that was, inconsolably depressed and sad. They had, their head in their hands and they were crying. And those are the only people I was looking for, or people that were depressed. Boy, were we wrong. We need to look at everybody. Because, again, what we've been saying all along is something sudden happens that can change a person's state of mind and their risk for suicide. I don't know if people like to read, but there's a great book, came out a couple of years ago. It's called Rethinking Suicide, Why We Were Wrong About How to Prevent Suicide. It's by Craig Bryan, who is a retired Air Force think he was a lieutenant colonel. Great book, and it talks about why we had this wrong, and it's a wonderful thing if you have time to read. So we all need to look for everybody. We need to open up our lens and find out how people are doing. We can't just count on, oh, that person's sad. Those are the only people we need to worry about.
Super. So I unpacked this a little bit at the last training, and I'll do it again now. I always say that, I remember when my husband came back from his 5th deployment. I had people coming up to me who just didn't understand the military culture and come up and say, oh my gosh, is he okay? Does he have PTSD? And my thought was, no, he's fine. And I even kind of was opened up when I learned about this too, is because I couldn't understand why people were coming up and asking me this. Because it's that whole thing, the veterans are broken, right? If they're deployed, well, we know that that's a myth, right? And that's a misconception. But deployment does not increase your risk for suicide. So I am going to unpack that a little bit. It's not the number of deployments. It's not the length of deployment. It's what you experienced while you were deployed, which is very intuitive to this crowd, right? We understand that. But it's a good way to talk about it to people that don't. And then I realized, now I know why people are asking me. And my husband was fortunate that he didn't see some catastrophic things that I'm sure most veterans or other veterans see. So he is okay. But we really, sometimes when we talk about this, we really need to unpack it a little bit more. So we talked about 50,000 people here in the United States dying by suicide, nearly 50, just shy of 50,000. That's a lot of people dying by suicide across our United States. When we look globally, it's almost 1 million. It's about 900,000. It's about 900,000 a year. My goodness. I can't even fathom that. So here in the United States, it takes more firefighters' lives than fire. You can read it yourselves. More people die from suicide than car accidents, etc. So we're looking at it being the number one cause of death in the under 45 in the veteran population, right? 2. More police officers than crime. So it puts it into perspective, right? It really puts it into perspective for us. It is a problem of humanity. And it touches everyone. We used to think it was just your close family and friends that were affected by a death or by somebody who died by suicide. It was 8, 10, 12 individuals max. But we know now that people are connected. People are connected to their communities. People are connected to the Legion, right? So when you look at, it's approximately about 135 individuals are affected by one suicide. And when you look at the number of individuals that die by suicide daily in the United States, and you can do the math, I think I did it for you below, it's 135 an average people that die by suicide every day here in the United States. You times that by people that are affected, which is 135, that just came out, that number, the same number, that's over 18,000 people a day that are affected by suicide. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. So there's still a lot of work to do. And it doesn't discriminate at all. I know Adam and I talk about this, and Adam was instrumental in doing some things with youth suicide, coming up kind of, in the suicide space. And we hear today of 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds that take their life. I can't even fathom somebody who's that young, right? Even knowing what to do. So it doesn't discriminate any profession, gender, age, doesn't matter. So what do we do as part of the public health approach and that community approach that both Adam and I have talked about? We try to find veterans where they work, live, and thrive. And where is that? That's basically everywhere that we can think of right in the community. I know we're working with our parks and recs and trying to put some signs around. I know our Dr. Kelly Posner, who's our director of the Lighthouse Project and the lead scientist on the Columbia Protocol and the creation of the Columbia Protocol, talks about that out in, okay, where's the big park? Arizona. Grand Canyon. Good Lord, my mind. I just had my birthday, a big birthday, so I'm over this milestone. So that's why my mind's starting to go. But the Grand Canyon, there's actually a sign out there. The Columbia is actually posted. And in some areas, you'll see that in some state parks, the Columbia is there. So we're trying to work with transportation, just with community members. And that's why we're here with the American Legion as well, and trying to support all of you, but also because we know that you're instrumental leaders, each one of you, in your community. Do you want to take it? And then you can go to the next one?
Sure.
Pretty soon we're getting to the tool, the Columbia Protocol. So I like how Adam does it, so I'm going to have him go through it with you.
Thank you. All right, so using a common language for suicide detection or risk identification. So you're going to learn the tool today where we talk about what is suicide ideation, what is suicide attempt, what is a plan, what is suicide intent. We want to make sure that we all use the same language so that when we're talking about suicide risk, we're all using the same terms. I also like to take, when I think about language, we all want to talk about what's safe messaging or media reporting. There's this whole very important part of the public health approach to suicide, which is the words that we use about suicide is really important. Unfortunately, we know that people who talk about suicide irresponsibly or glorify suicide, it can actually have an effect in increasing suicide risk. Does anybody remember the Robin Williams suicide? Okay. So we actually have researchers at Columbia University that did research on the effect of the really bad, really dangerous media reporting that was done around Robin Williams' death. And so what they found was, because of the newspaper and the media coverage of Robin Williams' suicide, they glorified him. They're like, hey, this is Patch Adams, this is a comedian. If he can die by suicide, I think we all could. And he was rich and he was famous. So if he can die, what's keeping us from staying alive? And then what they did, which was a really dangerous thing, is they detailed exactly how he died by suicide. All the methods, all the details, what was happening around how he died by suicide. And they printed that, and they put that out in social media. So basically a recipe on how to die by suicide. Really bad. So researchers found that because of that really bad reporting, the suicide rate in his demographic, so he was 55 white male, the suicide rate went up in that demographic. And one of the reasons was because of that bad reporting. So the way we talk about suicide is really important, and the language we use. So you're never going to hear me say the word commit. Why don't I say commit suicide? What do we associate with? We have some police officers, right? So what do we associate with the word commit? Commit a crime, right? And we have some faith people in here, so also commit a sin. So do we want people to think that if you're thinking about suicide, that you're right there with committing a crime and committing a sin? No. And what we've learned, again, with research is if you use that word, there can be some people who don't want to talk about suicide because you're associating what they're thinking about to something really, really bad. So we don't use the word commit. We also don't use the word successful suicide. Suicide is not successful. And then completed suicide. Completed is like completing a journey or completing something, that's been really tough to do. So we don't use completed suicide. Hopefully that all makes sense, that we want to make sure of the words that we're using and words that we don't want to use when we're talking about suicide. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about the scale. And hopefully you have cards. You have cards in your bag or a clipboard that have the questions. So this is called the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Screener. So this is what can be used. It's been being used all around the world. And it's not something, you don't have to be a doctor, you don't have to be a clinician. We all can use it. And we know that it can help people have a conversation, help people get the type of help that they need. So a lot of research has gone into this. A lot of hair splitting has gone into the words and the order of these questions. Many, many years of lots of science, which is good because we want to make sure if we're talking about something as serious as suicide that we have it right. So the first question is, have you wished you were dead or wished you could go to sleep and not wake up? So there's, I know I said this last time, but one of my favorite movies is The Shawshank Redemption. And in that movie, Morgan Freeman, he says this famous line, which is, hey, you either get busy living or you get busy dying. Yeah, there you go. So there's this back and forth that's part of being human, is where are you at with living or dying? And so this question gets at that. Where are you at with that? So we get a pulse check about where people are in terms of wanting to live or die. And then we have the second question, which is, have you actually had thoughts of killing yourself? So we go from kind of a vague wish to die or not be around anymore to then specifically, do you have thoughts of wanting to die? Okay, so if somebody says yes to number 2, you're going to go through all the questions. If they say no, then you can go ahead and stop the screener. But you can't stop caring about that person. Wendy was telling me today, and it was great, is that, you know what, is if you believe, you know, you're concerned about somebody, you're worried about them, you're asking them these questions. So that means that your gut is right. So just because they said no to not having thoughts of killing themselves doesn't mean that your job's done. That just means that, you know, they probably don't need immediate care, but they do need social support. They need connectedness. They need a buddy. They need somebody to help them. So you bring them in and you stay connected with them. You make sure they're doing okay. All right, so they say yes to number 2. Have you actually had any thoughts of killing yourself? So then you go on to number 3. Have you been thinking about how you might do this? So you have thoughts about wanting to kill yourself, and then how would you do it? What are you thinking about? Maybe how would you, run into traffic? You're thinking about ways that you could end your life. So that is another important step in terms of elevating risk if they're having thoughts and then thinking about maybe how they would do it. And then number 4 is where it really changes to high risk and where we really need to start thinking about getting them immediate help. And that's intent to die. So you have thoughts of wanting to die. You have an idea of how you would do it. And then there's some part of you that wants to not be alive anymore. So this intent, and it's only about 1% of people, but this is the high risk area where you have, like, yes, I do want to die. I'm not just thinking about it, I actually want to die. And then number 5 is also in that high risk area, the red area, which is, yes, I intend to die, and I have a specific plan of how I would do it. So number 5 is, have you started to work out or worked out the details of how to kill yourself? And then do you intend to carry out this plan? And then number 6 is important because you need to understand if a person has ever gone down this road before. Have they collected methods of suicide, pills, maybe gotten a firearm ready? Have they done that before? Have they attempted suicide before? So that's really important in understanding the whole level of risk as well. Okay, so beginning, you kind of get at this idea of, you know, where are you at, living or dying? And then you get to, do you actually have thoughts of killing yourself? And then is there a plan for those thoughts to die? And then do you have intent? Do you actually want to, you have intention to die by suicide? And then number 5, do you have a method that you have thought about to use in suicide? And then number 6, previous behaviors and preparatory behaviors in suicide. So those are the questions that you go through. So what we're going to do is we can go ahead and do a role play. And I understand we have a volunteer already. So, yeah. So,